Welcome to The Detail. I am your host, Kathy Antunes, and you are listening to The Detail on WSLR 96.5, LPFM in Sarasota, Florida, and WBPV 100.1 LPFM in Bradenton, Florida, or you may be watching this on YouTube. With me today is Morris Cunningham. He is an attorney and a University of Massachusetts in Boston political science professor. I know you just retired in 2021, but Dr. Cunningham is very well versed on the politics of dark money and school privatization. He has written a book by that name, Dark Money and the Politics of School Privatization. And we're going to be talking about what's going on in Sarasota County and also Moms for Liberty, what he continues to uncover regarding this, what some people would call an AstroTurf grassroots organization, that there are connections to larger groups out there. So Dr. Cunningham, and if I may call you Mo.
Go right ahead, please.
Okay, yeah. Mo, thanks so much for joining me today. We're recording this program shortly after a Sarasota County School Board meeting where a slated agenda item, which had not been properly noticed, where the background information was not provided to the public. But a Mr. Jordan Adams did appear on Zoom during the workshop before the meeting, where Bridget Ziegler, the founder of Moms for Liberty, is proposing that Jordan Adams, who is a civic curriculum specialist for Hillsdale College, somebody who was looking and very involved with making claims and looking for what he calls bias, CRT, woke, type agenda things in civic education. Mrs. Ziegler is wanting Sarasota County Schools to hire him as a consultant, a curriculum consultant. The numbers I've heard can be quite large, up to $3 million. And of course, Hillsdale College is really involved with charter schools and also the whole CRT conversation. So let's just dive in right there. Mo, we're going to be talking about your research about Moms for Liberty and all, but can you talk about what you know of Hillsdale College and how they figure into what's going on in K through 12 public education today, and Mr. Adams as a consultant?
Yeah. Well, Hillsdale College has become very prominent in Tennessee as well for taking over charter schools, and it's quite disturbing to hear that he would be involved in the Sarasota schools as well. Hillsdale is really a far right kind of a college that has done a lot of work on education, and its work is being adopted in places by extremists. It's very much a blinkered, would be kind of way to put it, look at our founding. It looks through the lens of white Christian fundamentalists, nationalists in many ways. And I would not want any child to be educated by Hillsdale College's view, which is whitewashed, convenient use of the word white in there, a whitewashed history of the nation's founding, and of what has come since. And so having children learn this, it's just a false view of history, is what it is.
Do you have any examples that you're aware of the ways?
Oh, 1776 is the purest moment of I mean, I love the Declaration. I've taught it many times myself, but when you look at the founding, you also have to look at Fifth Clause. You have to look at constitution making that reached compromises that legalized slavery, and you have to look at the entire history of the nation, you know?
Mhm.
And so not to do that is false. And they have this sort of whitewash view of it, you know, well, yeah, but they didn't really, they really, Jefferson and others, and this is accurate. He did argue for the end of slavery, but it didn't happen. He did
No,
own slaves. He did owe his leisure, his time to work on the great writings and so forth, to the fact that he was running a plantation where the slaver was enslaved. And
right.
so these are crucial aspects to understanding American history, but something like Hillsdale just reads them out, and we have this glorious sort of viewpoint of the finer aspects of our history, which is all well and good, but it's to leave out the less appealing aspects. It's just false, and it's essentially a lie to students.
Yeah, I'm reminded of, I went to Jefferson's University. We called him Mr. Jefferson when I went
Sure.
to the University of Virginia. And when it was established through DNA testing that Jefferson was indeed the father of Sally Hemings' children, and I was in Richmond when it was on the front page of the Richmond Times-Dispatch. And I do remember the Monticello Society. They just, weren't convinced. And they thought that the DNA really, really, we're not so sure that that's actually true. It took a lot for these ideas have to percolate, and a lot of
Yeah.
people don't accept them right away. And this isn't the first time in the history of man that people have wanted to turn the clock back on or rewrite history,
Yeah.
and sanitize it. And it appears that Mr. Jordan Adams' work is doing just that. That he takes a very photoshopped, if for to use a modern analogy, that's the concern, that
Yeah.
he photoshops history to take out parts that are ugly. What are you finding these days in your research? Because you've been on the show before and we've talked about how Moms for Liberty the genesis of Moms for Liberty was not like a typical grassroots organization.
Right.
You had three, and I'm going to share, from the Florida perspective, Tiffany Justice, Bridget Ziegler, and the third person, I forget her name.
Tina Descovich.
Tina Descovich. Okay, Brevard County, Tina
Yep.
Descovich, Tiffany Justice, and Bridget Ziegler's in Sarasota County. They founded this organization in December of 2020, I believe.
Yep.
And they were involved in what was called the Florida Coalition of School Board Members. It was a sidelined organization compared to the Florida Association of School Board Members. They had about a dozen members, whereas all of the school board members in Florida were in this larger organization, the Florida School Board Organization. And they were championing things like vouchers and charter schools. And then that was quietly kind of put to bed in the summer of 2020, and then they formed Moms for Liberty. So these folks were networked before Moms for Liberty. They had a common belief system, and then they created Moms for Liberty. But to get to how it didn't look like a normal grassroots organization, the professional polish, the merchandise, the websites, the chapters almost immediately popping up all over the United States. That was something that you don't usually see. What are you finding as you continue to research about their roots and who may be funding them?
Yeah, one thing is one thing I need to research better is the Florida Coalition of School Board Members, because as you say, you have these folks who are involved in it and it kind of peters out. And then there's this new group and it's turbocharged. You're
Yeah.
right. One day they don't exist, the next day, they're on Rush Limbaugh in the first month. They're
Mhm.
on. They go on Fox. They go on other programs in the right wing network. All of a sudden, they explode forward. They start publicly. They say they start on January 1, 2021, and yet, as you mentioned, they're already together in December of 2020.
Mhm.
They're posting things on Facebook with a number of 10 women. I have 10 women together, and this is, I think, December 11th. And they're all also already wearing their Moms for Liberty t-shirts,
And they have a logo.
and they have the logo. It's
Yeah.
all there.
Mhm.
Design went into it already, and the company that produces them was already on board. And you had, I don't think Bridget Ziegler was in that photo I saw, but Deskovich and Justice were, and Marie Rogerson was there, and she's a Republican operative in Florida. Who, when Bridget Ziegler leaves the board in February, Rogerson succeeds her, and she's already there in December, and she is a trainee graduate of the Leadership Institute, this right wing
Wow.
kind of long time, 40 plus years of training right wing activists. And
Mhm.
so the pieces are already together. The t-shirts, again, on June 9th so they're 9 days old officially. You can go on their website and they have a store and they're selling merchandise. They're selling t-shirts out of their store
Mhm.
in 9 days, which would require, right? Well, design already happened because we have a picture of them a month ago.
Yeah.
You have to contract with somebody to make them. You have to have it shipped to their story as well. It was shipped to, I think, one of their homes, and then they worked out of their garage or something.
And that's how they fund themselves, right? With t-shirts.
Yeah, yeah. But on the
That's what
9th, you
they
can go.
say.
Yeah, on the 9th, you can go on to, so there are contracts involved. How do you know if you're a company? They say, we'd like you to make these t-shirts for us and ship them to us. And you say, well, how are you going to get paid? Oh, don't worry about that. We've been around 9 days. Well,
Mhm.
credible at all. So there are signs. Oh, one other thing. If you look at the banner used by Moms for Liberty,
Mhm.
it's blue, which is the same deep blue that
Mhm.
Leadership Institute uses. And so there are just these things that crop up.
Okay.
Other things in the first year, it's not at all clear. There are statements made by the Leadership Institute in saying, well, we saw Moms for Liberty sort of, and we got in. It's not clear when they get in. They may have been there from the beginning, but immediately, they've got the store in 9 days, and the merch is for sale, and they claim we made 107 phone calls to get on the Rush Limbaugh program, right? We just kept
Mhm.
dialing down. Well, why would you do that? Bridget Ziegler's husband was then the vice chair of the Florida Republican Party, right? Why don't you just say, Christian, could you have Bridget say, Christian, couldn't you just call us? Marie Rogerson was already tied in with the Leadership Institute. Why don't you say, Marie, could you get Morton
Well,
Black to make a call for us? You wouldn't make 7 cold calls.
yeah, Bridget Ziegler is actually now has a role with the Leadership Institute, and she's conducting workshops. Um,
She, after her reelection to school committee, she was almost immediately hired by the Leadership Institute, and now she does school board trainings.
okay.
So that is, and when the Leadership Institute does these school board trainings in Iowa and in other places, they're often paired with Moms for Liberty. So they're working. It's now become more and more apparent. It's unclear in 2020 how close
Mhm.
together, or 2021, I should say. In 2023, it's very clear that Leadership Institute, which is a big, well-established organization that's been around for 40 years, knows what
Yeah,
it's doing, right?
she's the director of school
None of
board
those things
program.
describe Moms for Liberty. So
Yeah,
it's really Leadership Institute that's running the show.
yeah. It would if looking at her LinkedIn page, she is the director of school board programs and has been since August of 2022. So since her reelection.
Mhm.
But what you're saying is what's now kind of they're taking the covers off, or
Yeah.
it may be that now they're taking the covers off of a relationship that was there from the beginning. That's what
I
you
think that's the case. And even if you go back to their national summit last July in Tampa, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
All the trainings were done by Leadership Institute. The photography was done by Leadership Institute. The main
Okay.
sponsor was the Leadership Institute. Now, there are other Heritage and Turning Point USA and other right-wing operations involved, but
Mhm.
more and more you look at it and you say the Leadership Institute is really it's the skeleton and and the muscle and the sinew and
Mhm.
the things that make it go are the
Yeah.
Leadership Institute.
You
Now,
talked
listen,
about the color scheme. I just want to toss that in there. It reminds me of IBM, that
yeah,
big blue, that there's certain color, just an observation. Um, but yeah, so the Leadership Institute, who founded them? What are they about?
it's a guy named Morton Blackwell. I think it was 1979 he founded it. And the Leadership Institute does trainings for conservative activists. Anybody can go. I mean, there are sign-in things, there are member-only things, but you can go through their website and get a pretty good idea of the things they do. It's really extensive. It's state-of-the-art training, everything from organizing to targeting to how to behave in a debate to how to interact with the press, to doing press releases, to I mean, any aspect of politics. Good at it. They're really good at it.
Mhm.
Uh, Morton Blackwell founded that. He also was one of the founders of Council for National Policy, which is a right-wing clearinghouse and directorate of a few hundred of the most important, influential, and richest conservatives in the country. And he's on the board of CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Committee. So he's been around. Morton Blackwell has been around so long that he was a 1964 Goldwater delegate.
Oh, wow.
Do you
Okay.
want
So he must have been
the
a
faith?
youngster when he was a
Yeah,
Goldwater delegate.
He was the youngest Goldwater delegate.
Okay.
And
Okay.
he's a
So,
Republican National Committee member from Virginia.
so
But
I
do
go
you
ahead.
want piece of your organization? Do you want nice suburban moms, or do you want a guy who was a Goldwater delegate?
Hmm. Yeah.
What you present to the world? Well, you're gonna,
Right.
yeah, I think pretty obvious.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about, tell me more. The Council for National Policy
Yeah,
is a group that I came across in my research about January 6th and the
yeah,
role of local officials. For
yeah,
instance, Mr. Ziegler, Christian Ziegler was the vice chair. He was a county commissioner in
yeah,
Sarasota. He was the vice chair of the Florida Republican Party. He is now the chair of the Florida Republican Party. He has a business called Micro Targeted Media. But he was there on January 6th and not near the Capitol. I'm not saying that, but he certainly was claiming the election was stolen. There are many
yeah.
social media posts where he's suggesting or outright saying, "Stop the steal." He's fomenting other people, and according to my sources, there were hours of video that he took that disappeared
Yeah.
after um, January 6th, when it became clear that January 6th was actually a criminal act.
Yeah.
That video disappeared. It's interesting. I'm just share this. In the state of Florida, we have very robust public records laws and sunshine laws. But,
Mhm.
if you are an elected official or a public official and you have created records that are related to your work, you can't destroy them. They belong to the public. Christian Ziegler was an appointed elector for the state of Florida. He was
Uh,
actually an elector, as was Joe Gruters, so my state senator and my county commissioner at the time, Christian Ziegler, Joe Gruters, chair, vice chair. of the Florida GOP, and you've got the vice chair of the Florida GOP, who's actually an elector, who's sworn to uphold the Constitution, videotaping this protest. And then, it was, I believe it was up on Twitter, and it's gone. And I'm looking at it saying, aren't you supposed to legally not destroy a public record like that? I'm not asking you to answer it. I know you don't know the Florida public records laws, but people forget that Christian Ziegler was actually an elector for the state of Florida. And these things, the role of the Council of National Policy and its members, Ron DeSantis was a founding member of the Republican Freedom Caucus. And there are members of the Republican Freedom Caucus that are part of the Council for National Policy. So this networking, and then, the activities of January 6th and an election denial, they're there, these questions about, I'm not sure that, I mean, Christian Ziegler and his role in fomenting dissent and actually, beyond protest for the results of the 2020 election. And then you've got his wife, Bridget Ziegler, founding an organization that is very focused on creating controversy in communities about school, and dividing people, in ways that are extremely serious. When you look at the fabric of community, I don't know. I know I got on a roll there, but I find it very concerning. So getting back to the Council for National Policy, who are these folks? I know you said.
By the way, for people who want to learn more, there's a wonderful book about the Council for National Policy called Shadow Network by Ann Nelson.
Okay.
And Ann's written about their role in January 6th as well. But the Council for National Policy is a sort of a directorate of right-wing figures and representatives of organizations like Turning Point USA, Heritage Foundation, the owners of right-wing media networks, particularly Christian right-wing media networks, groups that have some troops on the ground, including things like Turning Point USA, National Rifle Association, and now Moms for Liberty. So the leaders of these groups come together. Morton Blackwell was a co-founder of Council for National Policy. Caroline Wetherington, who gave Bridget Ziegler's super PAC $10,000, is an elected hire and a member of Council for National Policy. And so, but this is an important planning and oversight group, as it plays a crucial role in how right-wing groups act. And so, Ann Nelson has a wonderful phrase in her book about many of the groups that work with them and under them. She calls them obedient franchises. And I would borrow that from Moms. I would say it is an obedient franchise of Leadership Institute and Council for National Policy. That's the role that it plays. They're not, it's not all of a sudden spontaneously a group of moms get together in this grassroots organization. Top down, it is centralized. It is part of the planning and technology and strategic vision of Leadership Institute, which is as good as it gets. They're very talented. They're very able. They're very experienced. And Moms for Liberty is just a unit of that enterprise.
Okay. Our Moms for Liberty president, they may have a different president now, but Alexis Spiegelman first made news in Florida, sitting outside of Rick Scott's home in Naples and leading a protest to have him. They were insisting that he, again, not certify the 2020 election. They were claiming that the election was stolen. So yeah, the Moms for Liberty crowd here are very tied to the claims about Stop the Steal and election fraud. You know, you had mentioned Turning Point USA, and Turning Point USA is Charlie Kirk has a place on Longboat Key in Sarasota County. Julie Fanicelli, who is the Publix heiress, also has a place on Longboat Key and has funded Turning Point USA. What is the relationship that you've seen, if any, between Turning Point USA and Moms for Liberty?
Oh, well, Turning Point USA was a sponsor of their national summit last year, had a table there. So they're quite involved. You know, I think it was a $5,000 sponsorship. I don't think there's any question that they're related. You know, as I say, they're both within the overall umbrella of Council for National Policy. They support each other. And that's clear. And going back, you mentioned Julie Fancelli. So she gave $50,000 to the Moms for Liberty Political Action Committee for school board races last year. She is not supports. You mentioned she supports Turning Point USA. Okay, but she put $3 million into the January 5th and 6th rallies that Donald Trump had, the big lie rallies. And was negotiating to have her favorites get speaking roles on January 6th. Alex Jones was involved, the conspiracy theorist, in getting her to put up. Carolyn Wren was involved. And these were people who were right at the top of things on the January 6th rally. So you have the same person giving $50,000 so Moms for Liberty can run their school board races last year. You know, you just scratch the surface and it shows up over and over again. The interlocking webs of these individuals are just there, and there's no denying.
Well, you know, having been in sales and learned this lesson, I mean, relationships are important in any business, and it appears that the Leadership Institute, not, you know, they don't just train people, but it seems that they also foster these relationships. Certainly the Council for National Policy, you know, and like I said in my own research about January 6th and local officials, that and how the whole election denial angle and explanation with Sidney Powell and her claims about, you know, missing, you know, abnormal logs, voter logs, which turned out to be completely nothing. And like what, over 60 lawsuits that came to nothing because the evidence was not there. But, you know, these were Council for National Policy folks, some that I had heard of, but some that I'd never heard of. And they were simply wealthy people, a lot of them that had either run for office and you know, didn't make it. But this was like their way of staying plugged in. So if you're just joining me, my guest is Morris Cunningham, Mo Cunningham. He is the author of Dark Money and the Private Politics of School Privatization. This is a great read. I've referenced your work in my own shows and writing, Mo, and and everyone, you're listening to The Detail on WSLR 96.5 LPFM in Sarasota, Florida, and WBPV 100.1 LPFM in Bradenton, Florida. The Sarasota County School Board meets on April 18th to discuss, among other things, their proposed contract with Vermilion, a consulting company whose principal is Jordan Adams, formerly of Hillsdale College, a civic education specialist from Hillsdale College. That meeting will be at 6 p.m. at Sarasota County School Board, the Landings. You can go to sarasotaschools.net, sarasotacountyschools.net, to get more information. So Mo Cunningham, I want to share my screen with you and talk a bit more about the PAC that you referenced. And this is, it's going to take me a minute to pull it up, but our research has dovetailed,
Yep,
I,
it has.
yeah, let's see, I've been a researcher of local dark money here in Sarasota County and its impact on our local politics. So this is a schematic of the PAC called Friends for Bridget Ziegler. And I'm going to see if I can get this a little bigger. You can't quite. So it's Friends for Bridget Ziegler. And this just shows the orange buckets. We're going to do our best because I know if you're listening on the radio, you can't see the image, but on YouTube, you'll be able to. I'm just going to run through some of these donors that were listed. Actually, some of them have somehow disappeared off of the state database, but I have all of the screenshots to prove these donations. You've got Caroline Wetherington, and you mentioned her, I believe. Caroline Wetherington.
Council for National Policy member. Yep.
Okay. Caroline Wetherington is married to Lee Wetherington, who is a developer in Sarasota County. So you're saying she's a Council for National Policy member. She gave $10,000 to a PAC called Friends for Bridget Ziegler. Dan Miller, Karen Rose's husband, who's a current school board member, he gave $2,000. Shark Coast Tactical is a gun shop in Sarasota. They gave $10,000 to Friends for Bridget Ziegler. All legal, right? An ophthalmologist, Dr. Shoemaker, gave $10,000 through an LLC called North Tammy LLC. Pat Neal, local developer, $7,000. And then another PAC, Team Bridget, gave about $5,000 to Friends of Bridget Ziegler. Micro-targeted media is Christian Ziegler's company. Christian Ziegler's company was paid nearly $22,000 from the PAC Friends of Bridget Ziegler. And then other firms that send out mailers, a photographer, a robocalling firm, they were all the bulk of the rest of the spending. In total, it was about $57,000 that went into that PAC. I want to, we could talk about Caroline Wetherington and the gun shop donation, which blows. I shouldn't use that analogy. It just, I'm so surprised that a gun shop gives that much money for a PAC for a school board race. Bridget Ziegler was actually the registered agent for this PAC. I mean, she was an officer of the PAC. And, PAC, the reason PACs exist is to get around campaign finance limitations, right?
Yeah.
Well, I have never seen a candidate actually heading up a PAC to benefit their own candidacy. They're not supposed to do that.
I don't know Florida law. That would be the caveat I'd have about that. You certainly don't often see it. You don't see it with federal super PAC or the independent expenditure PACs in other states I'm familiar with, because you're supposed to be independent. Now, usually there's a gossamer barrier between the two, but there is, in other states, this would be highly unusual and unlawful in many states. I don't know about Florida, but it's for kind of obvious reasons, it's a bad practice, I think.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah. So
one of the payees I noticed there was Christian Ziegler's micro-targeted media company. So it's a PAC to benefit his wife's with his wife at the head of it, and they're paying his business. It's
Yeah, and I'm just gonna again just kind of because I like to, be complete about this, but just to show you, this is live data from the Florida elections
Yeah.
database. And this political committee, Friends of Bridget Ziegler, you can see the chairperson is Bridget Ziegler, treasurer is a former school board member, Eric Robinson, and the registered agent is Bridget Ziegler.
Yeah.
I can tell you right now, what I've seen with dark money in Florida is that there are rules. And again, I've never seen a candidate actually put their name on the PAC and start a PAC to benefit, their race. That's a new one by me, but the rules are not enforced. You have to complain, and a lot of citizens aren't paying any attention. You have to actually file a formal complaint. And very rarely have I ever seen something substantive done, about violations. So we did have a local candidate who donated, they made a donation to a PAC to benefit, to identify their party. And he was sanctioned. But this one is kind of a flabbergasting departure from the whole, self-interest aspect, right?
Yeah.
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 Micro-targeted media was also paid. Didn't Moms for Liberty hire them?
They also paid, I think, there was an article in it in the 74 education online publication. I think $22,000, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So he was getting, his company, I should say, was being paid by Moms for Liberty for kind of work that he does. He's a political contractor, in addition to being, the former vice chair, and now the chair of the Republican Party of Florida, very close to the Trump campaign, very close to the DeSantis campaign,
Mm-hmm.
and a major player, which is why, to go back to, that first month when supposedly they're making 107 cold calls to Rush Limbaugh. It's like, let's be a little more efficient to just have Christian Ziegler get you on the show, which I suspect is some version of what really happened.
Is of what really happened.
We'll never know for sure.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit, Billy Townsend's been on my show a number of times. He's a local Florida blogger on school board issues. And he basically says, behind all these culture wars, that's not even the main, that's the distraction.
Yeah.
It's really about the grift. It's really about the money. What do you think of that statement?
Well, I'm probably different with Billy some in that I think it is incomplete. I think there is a component. The Council for National Policies, when the Trump administration came in, sent a memo. Here are our views on education reform. And it was a very kind of white Christian perspective on what should be taught. So I do think it's important to them. But Billy is on to something when you look at some of the contracts that get passed around here. I understand he's on the ground and has done the work on it, but I just recently came across one. Tennessee has required, kind of retraining their teachers about how to teach history. And there's a course being offered by Carol Swain, a former political science professor at Vanderbilt. For $399, you come to this training for a whole day, and we'll certify with $399. But she's a member of the Council for National Policy too. So, so the opportunities here are all around, and I'm not surprised to see some of these organizations trying to get into the public wallet. That wouldn't surprise me at all.
So Carol Swain was she was a professor with Vanderbilt.
She's a retired professor. She also held a conference in 2021 What was it called? Oh, I think it was in Tennessee, and it was I forget the name of it right now. The American Dream Conference, and who were the co-sponsors? Moms for Liberty.
Okay. 2021. So there's a lot of fingers in this pie in terms of reshaping our civic education in the country. If that's certainly getting back to Sarasota County and Bridget Ziegler's proposal, which now they tabled it because concerns were raised that although they never acknowledged this was the reason why, but factually speaking, this was a proposal that was not noticed properly. Yeah. You have to notice it. You have to put the information up so the public can read and see and know what you're doing. What's also unusual about this proposal is that embedded in it is that apparently Mrs. Ziegler, as the chair of the school board, is going to work closely with this consultant to review curriculum, which there was a former school board member who came to the dais at yesterday's meeting, Shirley Brown, and this isn't your purview. This isn't, school board members don't sit with consultants and shape curriculums. The superintendent does that. What are you doing? We've never seen anything like this. And that aspect of it is sort of under the radar. So you mentioned, and I really think this is worth talking about, most people in this country are Christian, right? And there are values that, and the people who have joined Moms for Liberty, they weren't forced to do it. Like, they have tapped into a sentiment in this country,
right?
That there, and I think there's a spectrum. I'm sure there's a lot of parents who, around gender issues, can get concerned. Well, where are you going to be teaching my kids? And I don't know if I agree with this. Or Pride days, around homosexuality. And some people have religious beliefs around that, and they're concerned about this stuff being taught in schools. And then conflating it all with CRT. I guess what I'm trying to get at is they're tapping into some real cultural differences that we have to navigate as a society, right? But then what I see is, instead of just acknowledging, there's going to be differences of opinion here, we have to serve all kids and all parents. How do we do that respectfully, right? Versus inflaming people, versus, picking on these kids who are going through something very difficult, right? In the terms of transgender children, it's and their parents too. So what do you make of, I guess, we're a Christian nation. The folks that have joined groups like Moms for Liberty, many of them have a very genuine belief religiously. And that, and how it's being tapped into and activated.
Well, it's really beyond my level of expertise to speak to solve those problems. But I will say that Moms for Liberty is not here to solve those problems. They are here to take out of context, to blow up things that are relatively minor, to mischaracterize things, use CRT, and let's face it, that's become Republican shorthand for what really the rest of us, including most Christians in the nation, recognize as the accurate teaching of American history.
Yeah.
And really abominable attacks on the most vulnerable of children in the nation, transgender children, mischaracterizing transgender processes, failing to even address any of the nuances or the challenges or the fact that their parents care about them as much as any of us care about our children. That's not what they're about. They are there to pick things apart, to pull things out, to exploit them, and to create more divisions in our politics, as a way of gaining control and of hopefully, my position is in the short term, they are trying to create chaos in public school systems. And in the long term, they're trying to bring down public school systems, destroy teachers' unions, privatize education for profit, and turn it into what the Council for National Policy said they want in their document, which is a Christian education.
And isn't it often a segregated education as well?
Yeah, again, not my area of scholarship, but sure, there's plenty written about that from the 1950s on. It becomes a means to after Brown versus Board, it becomes a means of being able to provide places where parents could send their white kids that they wouldn't have to send them with Black or Latino or other. Now it's a much more diverse nation than it was in the 1950s, and it's a way to get around that. And so when you look at that and you understand those are the origins, then their claims of liberality now really fall apart, I think.
Yeah. So I wanted to share, just to your point about blowing things up and picking things apart. So this is a recent tweet that Bridget Ziegler, this is her husband, Christian Ziegler, retweeting his wife's tweet. She was responding to a candidate in Wisconsin. She affiliated with Moms for Liberty. I think her name is Scarlett Johnson. And the Twitter handle is at Scarlett for Kids, 2 T's, Scarlett. And also at Bud Light. And I honestly don't know why Bud Light. There was some film with a woman in a bubble bath drinking Bud Light. But Bridget Ziegler is wearing a t-shirt that says "Real women aren't men." And, this is an issue that, like I said, it touches on spiritual beliefs, religious teachings. We're not going to all think the same way in this country about transgender issues. That's just a given.
Right.
But for a school board member and for the founder of Moms for Liberty to, strike this pose with sunglasses and point at herself wearing this t-shirt, I was like, what are you doing? What? And again, I think it speaks to what you're saying is this isn't about navigating difficult issues together that require sensitivity and nuance. And this is just about riling people up.
Yeah, and it speaks to a viewpoint on this that is not at all thoughtful about the issue itself, but seeks to exploit people's feelings about this for a political cause. That's a political photograph that was just up there. It's meant to inflame people. It's meant to be tribal, and it succeeds on that level. I mean,
it does.
They're high-ranking. The Zieglers are about as high-ranking as you get in Florida Republican politics. They know what they're doing, and it's exploitative, and they're happy to go about things that way because it serves their political interests.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because after people get riled up, they're like, "I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything wrong." That kind of tactic, engaging people's emotions, right? Getting them really disturbed and upset. Are you aware is this part of the Leadership Institute training? Because
it's interesting. I haven't seen much on the training itself, but I can tell you the reason I recognized groups like Parents Defending Education and Moms for Liberty when they burst on the scene was because the same sort of things had been done against college professors by groups including Campus Reform, which, it happens, is a unit of the Leadership Institute. And what they do is they take something that a professor who they will deride as a left wing professor,
Mhm.
something the professor has written, might not be in a published work, but maybe on social media or something, blow it out of proportion and create a media storm over it. Oftentimes, more often than not, the professor is a woman or a person of color, and they will blow up this out of context remark. It will show up in Breitbart, Daily Caller, places like that. If they really get lucky with it, it'll show up on Fox, and then in come the threats via social media versus email. One such instance, I can't remember if this was campus reform, but it was the same kind of activity. Got blown up, and Trinity College in Hartford had to shut down for a day.
Oh,
You know,
wow.
professors have had talks canceled because it's not safe to hold the talk after they get attacked. So I don't think the kinds of things that you see here are they're intentional. You know, and
Yeah.
they'll step back and say, "Oh no, we're joyful warriors. We would never." But out of hand. Well, these people are very sophisticated. They understand full well that
Mhm.
they're pushing a trigger and expecting a reaction, and they know they don't may not know when or where that reaction will come exactly, but they know it's coming.
Yeah, right. Well, it seems to be the whole game. And
Yeah,
then when there's, again, extreme examples of fomenting dissent and selling um ideas that aren't true, right? Like the
yeah,
2020 election was stolen. Well, no, it wasn't. Uh, one candidate
yeah,
won, one candidate lost. Um, but the people who get uh, riled up and the people who are actually, you've got the puppet masters, which seem like, these
yeah.
leadership institute folks and the Council for National Policy folks
Exactly.
totally happy to have other people get out there and do their dirty work, right? And then they go, oh, no,
Yeah.
I don't condone violence.
No.
That's not
Oh
me.
no, we've never encouraged that. Well, it's entirely foreseeable, and they understand it's entirely foreseeable, and they do it over and over and over again.
Hmm. So
It's time to stop saying, "Oh, gee whiz, maybe it was just an unfortunate consequence." No, it wasn't. It's intentional.
yeah, and I realize this might be something uh, a little far afield of the research that you've done. But, when radio and television came into play into the United States, these were powerful communication mediums. And the FCC came in and said, these are public airwaves. You have a responsibility to provide information
Yeah,
if you want to have a license. And there were parameters around that responsibility, the
yeah,
internet is different in that it's not as easily defined as a public airway, and we haven't seen the kind of standards, but for that matter, cable, right? And
yeah,
you've got Fox News being sued for defamation by Dominion, and text messages that clearly show that Fox News hosts knew that
yeah,
this whole election fraud thing was a sham. Um, for networks that are putting misinformation out there, where's the consequence? But it seems to me what's different now is you've got this new medium that's very difficult to have standards, and so people can have
yeah,
huge megaphones and put stuff out there, and there's there's no reins, there's
right.
no sheriff, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, and simple, really corporate standards that once existed at Twitter and sometimes kind of exist at Facebook, I guess. This is
Mm.
no expertise either. But under relentless right wing attacks, those have fallen off. Elon Musk has certainly signaled that his Twitter is open to right wing misinformation. Uh,
Mhm.
misinformation, and so it's promoted there. So it makes for a much more difficult environment in which to seek out the truth when you have media outlets like Fox. Basically, their business plan is basically to lie to people because it's bad for business. They decided if they tell the truth, their customers do not want to hear the truth, they think, and so therefore we're not going to tell them the truth. They will tell them, and that's sort of where Fox is, and it rolls along.
But and we're coming up on the end of the hour. Fox, it was unprecedented. Again, there was a rule in the country that media outlets had to be owned by Americans.
Yeah.
And Rupert Murdoch, Congress made an exception for Rupert Murdoch, and Rupert Murdoch became an owner of major media outlet. And Fox News is now, you're seeing a rule that made a lot of sense. We're going to have Americans owning American companies. There's a certain shared value system. Murdoch has definitely departed, from those values.
Who has become an American citizen.
By Congress.
But the point is, that really it's untrustworthy. And the other thing is, right-wingers have worked for decades. Nicole Hemmer, another professor, has written about this. Very good books. Have worked for decades to undermine faith that people have in the mainstream media, which are not flawless, obviously, so that their audiences will only believe what they hear on Fox or Breitbart or Daily Caller or other things that have no interest in bringing them the truth, but they have lost faith in mainstream media entirely. So you can tell them the truth, you can show them it's the truth, and they won't believe you. It's really a trick.
Yeah, I think we continue to be in pretty unprecedented. Actually, these waters aren't too different than what was going on in the early part of the last century, when it comes to the grifting and a gilded age. Sarah Chase has written a great book called On Corruption in America, and she talks about how what's going on now was going on in the late 1800s and up to the 1920s until the Great Depression. So I'm afraid we're out of time. Dr. Cunningham, Mo Cunningham, thank you so much for joining me. And again,
my pleasure, as always.
Yeah, sharing your research. You have written the book Dark Money and the Politics of School Privatization. Well, look forward to learning more about what you uncover in your research about what's going on with education in the United States. So thanks so much for being with me.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You have been listening to The Detail on WSLR 96.5 LPFM in Sarasota, Florida, and WBPV 100.1 LPFM in Bradenton, Florida. If you are interested in school board issues, the next school board meeting in Sarasota County is April 18th at the Landings. It will start at 6 p.m. and they will be discussing the proposed Vermillion contract that school board chair Bridget Ziegler has brought forward to hire the company of Jordan Adams. It's called Vermillion. And Mr. Adams is a former Hillsdale College civic education consultant. Thanks so much for listening. Be sure to stay tuned for more public affairs programming here on WSLR. Make it a great day.